Before this one gets going, hit subscribe and tap the notification bell, because what you're about to watch is a moment that even the crew backstage still talks about, and you will not want to miss whatever we bring you next. Steve Harvey had walked off that stage exactly twice in his entire career hosting Family Feud, both times for commercial breaks that ran a little long, both times back within minutes, joking with the crew about needing a glass of water. So when a 39-year-old contestant named Darius Coleman said 6 words into a live taping that made Steve Harvey turn, walk straight past the cameras, and disappear behind the curtain without a word to anyone, the studio audience did not know whether to be worried, confused, or simply stunned into silence. And for nearly 90 full seconds, that silence was exactly what filled the room. It started simply enough. Darius stood at the family podium alongside his mother, his 2 younger sisters, and his uncle, a team that had made it through the qualifying rounds after applying together as a tribute to a family reunion they had been planning for months. The application, submitted almost a year earlier, had originally been Darius's father's idea, something he had mentioned every single Sunday afternoon while the family gathered around the television to watch reruns. Always saying, someday we're going to get out there and show them how a real family plays this game. None of them had known, filling out that application, that their father would not live to see whether it was ever accepted. Darius's mother had nearly withdrawn the family's participation entirely once the acceptance letter finally arrived, 6 months after her husband's passing, unsure whether she had the emotional strength to stand on that stage without him. It was Darius who convinced her otherwise, telling her that showing up was exactly the kind of thing his father would have wanted, that walking away from something he had dreamed about for years felt like a second loss layered on top of the first one. His sisters had agreed immediately, and his uncle, his father's own younger brother, had stepped in to fill the 4th spot on the team without a second of hesitation, saying there was no way he was letting his brother's family stand up there without at least one more Coleman by their side. Steve Harvey greeted them with his usual warmth, working down the line with jokes and compliments until he reached Darius at the end. "Now who do we have right here representing the family?" Steve said, extending his hand. "Darius Coleman," he said, shaking Steve's hand firmly. "Been waiting my whole life to stand on this stage, Mr. Harvey." "Well, we're glad to have you," Steve said, moving to continue down his usual introduction routine. "So tell me, what brings the Coleman family out here today? What are we playing for?" Darius glanced quickly at his mother, who gave him a small nod. The kind of nod that says, "Go ahead, say it, we agreed on this together." He turned back to Steve, his voice steady, but carrying a weight that made the studio lean in without quite understanding why yet. "We're playing for Daddy's grave," Darius said. The words landed in the studio like a held breath released all at once. Steve Harvey's easy stage smile faltered, just slightly, the way a person's expression shifts when they sense they have walked into something far heavier than they expected. "Say that again for me, Darius," he said quietly. "Our father passed 8 months ago," Darius said. "Heart attack. Sudden. No warning at all. He worked construction his whole life, never had much saved, no insurance to speak of. We managed to bury him, but we could only afford a temporary marker, one of those little metal plaques that's supposed to hold until you can put a real headstone down. Problem is, the cemetery gave us a year before they start charging storage fees on an unmarked plot, and none of us have been able to put together the money for a proper headstone since. We're not playing for a vacation today, Mr. Harvey. We're playing so our father can finally have his name carved into something that'll last." Steve Harvey stood completely still for a moment, his hand still resting on Darius's shoulder from the handshake a moment earlier. The studio, sensing something had shifted, had gone almost entirely silent, save for the faint sound of someone in the front row quietly crying. Steve opened his mouth as if to respond, then closed it again. He looked at Darius, then at Darius's mother, whose eyes were already brimming with tears she was clearly working hard to hold back for her son's sake. Steve nodded slowly, once, and without another word, he turned and walked off the stage, disappearing behind the black curtain at the side of the set, leaving the entire studio. The cameras still rolling, the contestants still standing at their podiums, in a stunned and uncertain silence that nobody quite knew how to fill. 90 seconds is an eternity on live television. The floor director, standing just off camera, glanced toward the control booth, unsure whether to call for a break or simply let the moment sit. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some of them exchanging worried glances, wondering if something had gone terribly wrong, if Steve Harvey himself had been overcome by something none of them yet understood. Darius stood frozen at the podium, suddenly worried he had said something wrong, something that had upset the man everyone in that room had come to see. Backstage, according to crew members who later described the moment to producers, Steve Harvey had walked straight past two assistants who tried to ask if he needed anything, found a quiet corner near the wardrobe racks, and simply stood there for a long moment with his hand pressed against the wall, breathing slowly, the way a man does when he is trying to hold something back that has caught him completely by surprise. One longtime member of the crew, who had worked alongside him for over a decade, said she had never once seen him step away mid-taping in all her years on the show, and that watching him do it that day told her, before he had even said a word about why, that whatever had just been said out on that stage had reached somewhere very personal. His mother reached over and squeezed his hand. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby," she whispered. Sometimes the truth just needs a minute to land. When Steve Harvey finally reemerged from behind the curtain, his eyes were red, and he made no effort at all to hide it, walking back onto the stage with none of his usual stride, none of his usual energy. Simply a man who had clearly needed a moment alone to compose himself before he could trust his own voice again. He walked directly to Darius, ignoring the cameras entirely for a moment, and pulled the young man into a firm, unhurried hug. When he finally stepped back, he kept both hands on Darius's shoulders, looking him directly in the eye. "I had to step away for a minute," Steve said, his voice thick and unsteady, in a way the audience had rarely, if ever, heard from him on that stage. "Because my own father worked with his hands his whole life, too. Man never had much, worked himself into the ground providing for his family, and when he passed, we had our own struggles putting a proper stone over him. I know exactly what that year feels like, watching that clock tick down on a temporary marker, feeling like you're failing your daddy all over again just because money's tight. I haven't thought about that in a long time, and hearing you say those words just now, it took me right back there." The studio, already emotional, fell into a hush so complete that the hum of the studio lights felt almost audible. "I want you to understand something," Steve continued, still holding Darius's gaze. "A man's grave marker isn't about vanity. It isn't about showing off for the neighbors. It's about making sure the world knows somebody was here, that he mattered, that his name doesn't get erased just because life didn't leave him with a fat bank account when he passed. What you're doing today, coming out here fighting for your daddy's headstone, that is one of the most honorable things I have ever heard a son say on this stage." Darius, unable to hold back any longer, wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. He used to watch this show every single Sunday, Mr. Harvey. Used to say if he ever got the chance, he'd love to stand right where I'm standing. I guess in a way I'm standing here for both of us today. Steve nodded slowly, clearly still working to steady his own voice. "Then let's make sure we play this game the right way, because your daddy's watching, and I don't want either one of us to let him down today." The game resumed, though something in the studio's energy had shifted permanently, a quiet reverence settling over the room that carried through every question and every answer for the remainder of the taping. The Coleman family played with focus and heart, clearly determined not to let the emotional weight of the moment throw them off their game. Each of them answering with a kind of steady composure that comes from people who have already survived something far harder than a game show clock. By the time Fast Money arrived, the family had built a strong position through the main game, needing just under 130 points combined to secure the top prize. Darius's sister went first, posting a solid 74 points, leaving Darius himself needing just 56 to close it out and secure the win for his father. Steve Harvey knelt beside the podium before the round began, speaking quietly, just between the two of them, though the microphones caught every word. "You've got this, son. Just breathe. Answer like your daddy taught you to answer everything in life, straight and honest." Darius nodded, gripping the podium. 20 seconds. "Name something you might find at a construction site," Steve asked. "Hard hat," Darius answered immediately. "Survey says." The board revealed the top answer, 39 points. "Name a tool every man should know how to use." "Hammer," Darius said. "Survey says." Another strong answer, 26 points, already putting the family well within reach of the number they needed. Steve moved through the remaining questions, and Darius answered each one with a kind of quiet determination. The studio watching in respectful silence between each reveal, nobody cheering too loudly, everyone somehow understanding that this round carried a different kind of weight than the usual celebratory energy of Fast Money. By the final question, the family had already secured more than enough points to win, but Steve, sensing the moment deserved one last piece of care, asked the closing question with particular gentleness. "Last one. Darius, name something a father teaches his son that he never forgets." Darius closed his eyes for a moment before answering, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke. "How to work hard even when nobody's watching." "Survey says," Steve announced, and the board lit up with the answers sitting at the very top, 41 points. The Coleman family had won the top prize, and the studio rose in an ovation unlike any other that day, not the usual explosion of celebratory noise, but something steadier, more solemn, more reverent, as though the entire room understood they were applauding something far larger than a game show victory. Darius's mother rushed to embrace him, both of them crying openly, his sisters and uncle joining the hug a moment later, the whole family wrapped together at center stage, while the audience continued its steady, respectful applause. Steve Harvey let the moment breathe before raising his hand for quiet. "Coleman family, I want you to know something. That prize money is going to help you finish what you came here to do, and I hope every single one of you sleeps a little easier tonight knowing your daddy's grave is finally going to have the marker he deserved all along." He paused, turning to address the cameras directly, his voice still carrying the emotional weight of the last 20 minutes. "Folks, I've been hosting this show a long time, and I don't often step away from this stage mid-taping. But when I heard those 6 words today, 'We're playing for Daddy's grave,' it took me somewhere I hadn't been in a long time. Back to my own father, back to my own family's struggle to give him the marker he deserved. I needed a minute, and I'm not ashamed to admit that." He turned back to Darius. "But I want you to know, walking off that stage wasn't about weakness. It was about respect. Respect for what your family is carrying, respect for what your daddy built with his own 2 hands his whole life. Sometimes, the strongest thing a man can do is step away for a second so he can come back and give a moment the honor it actually deserves." In the weeks following the taping, once the episode aired, the clip of Steve Harvey walking off stage spread further and faster than almost anything the show had produced that season. Viewers moved not by spectacle, but by the raw, unguarded humanity of a veteran host who had clearly been caught completely off guard by grief he had not expected to feel that day. Funeral homes and memorial companies reached out to the production offering to donate materials toward the Coleman family's headstone. And within 2 weeks, more than enough had been raised, through donations and the prize money combined, to commission a proper granite marker. One large enough to carry not just their father's name and dates, but a short line the family chose together. A phrase he had said to each of them at different points throughout their lives: worked hard, loved harder. News outlets picked up the story within days. Several running segments about the rising cost of funerals and headstones across the country, using the Coleman family's experience to highlight how many working families found themselves in exactly the same position. Unable to afford a permanent marker in the immediate aftermath of a loved one's passing. A number of viewers wrote in describing their own temporary metal plaques still sitting on family graves years after a burial. Some admitting they had never told anyone how much shame they carried over not yet being able to afford something more permanent, and finding in the Coleman family's story permission to finally ask for help or start their own savings toward the same goal. The headstone was placed 3 months later, the entire extended family gathering at the cemetery on a cool autumn morning. Darius standing where his father had once stood at countless other family gravesites over the years, finally able to look down at solid stone instead of a small metal plaque that had been quietly ticking down toward an expiration none of them could bear to think about. His mother knelt at the base of the new stone for a long while before anyone else approached, running her fingers slowly across the engraved letters of her husband's name, and Darius said later that watching her in that moment, finally at peace after months of carrying an invisible weight, was worth more to him than any prize money the show had awarded them. Steve Harvey, when asked about the moment in interviews afterward, always circled back to the same point, that the 6 words Darius spoke that day had reminded him why the show mattered in the first place. Not for the games or the prizes, but for the space it gave ordinary families to say something true in front of the whole world, and for the chance it gave him. Even after all his years on that stage, to still be moved, still be human, still willing to walk away for 90 seconds if that was what honoring someone's memory required. Darius kept a small framed photo from the taping on his father's headstone visit each year, the moment just after the reveal when Steve Harvey had first pulled him into that hug. A reminder, he said, that sometimes the people who have nothing much to give financially can still leave something behind that money never could. Respect, honesty, and a name that will not be forgotten. If this story moved you the way it moved everyone in that studio, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because we bring you real stories about family, grief, and honoring the people we love every single week, and you will not want to miss what comes next. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.